He stood on a rise just north of the city. Rome lay below in its bed of hills, destroyed as though sacked by Vandals. The Obalioni traced the outlines of the leaning wall, the fortress of Sant'Angelo. They got back on their horses and descended to the Porta del Popolo, passing the tomb of Nero's mother, to enter the small piazza. It stank from piled garbage. Above them to the left was the Pincio hill covered with vineyards. The streets they followed were narrow lanes with broken cobbles underfoot. The noise of carts passing over the stones was so deafening that Michelangelo could barely hear Baglioni identifying the dilapidated tomb of the Roman Emperor Augustus, now a grazing field for cows. The Campo Marzio plain near the Tiber, inhabited by the poor artisans whose shops were huddled between ancient palaces that looked as though they would topple at any moment. More than half of the buildings he passed were gutted. Goats wandered among the fallen stones. Baglioni explained that the previous December, the Tiber had flooded. And the people had had to flee for 3 days to the surrounding hills, returning to a dank, decaying city in which the plague struck, and 150 corpses were buried each morning on the island in the river. Michelangelo felt sick to his stomach. The mother city of Christendom was a waste heap and a dunghill. Dead animals lay under the feet of their horses. Wrecking crews were breaking out walls of building stone for use elsewhere, burning marble slabs and columns for their lime content. He guided his horse around a piece of ancient statuary sticking up through the dirt of the road, past rows of abandoned houses, salt and vines growing in their crumbling mortar. Skirting a Grecian temple, he saw pigs penned between its columns. In a block-square subterranean vault with broken columns half emerging from an ancient forum, there was a horrendous odor rising from hundreds of years of dumped refuse, and generations of men whose descendants even now were squatting over its void, defecating into its depth. His host led him through a series of dark, winding streets where 2 horses could barely pass each other, past the theater of Pompeii with hundreds of families living in its yawning vault, and then, at last, into the Campo dei Fiori, where he saw his first signs of recognizable life. A vegetable, flour, cheese, fish, and meat market crowded with row upon row of clean, colorful stalls. The cooks and housewives of Rome shopping for their dinner. For the first time since they had descended into Rome, he was able to look at his host and tender him a wisp of a smile. Frightened? The Obalioni asked, or revulsed? Both. Several times I almost turned my horse and made a run for Florence. Rome is pitiful. You should see the pilgrims who come from all over Europe. They are robbed, beaten, ridden down by our princely processions, bitten half to death by vermin in the inns, then separated from their last denaro in the churches. Bracciolini wrote some 60 years ago, "The public and private buildings lie prostrate, nude, and broken like the limbs of a giant. Rome is a decaying corpse." Pope Sixtus IV made a real effort to widen the streets and repair some of the buildings. But under the Borgias, the city has fallen into a worse condition than that of which Bracciolini wrote, "Here's my home." Standing on a corner overlooking the market was a well-designed house of 3 floors. Inside, the rooms were small and sparsely furnished with walnut tables and chairs, but richly carpeted, with tapestries and precious cloths on the walls, and decorated with painted wooden cupboards, gold mirrors, and red leather ornaments. Michelangelo's sailcloth bag was carried up to the 3rd floor. He was given a corner room overlooking the market and a staggeringly huge new stone palace, which his host told him was just being completed by Cardinal Riario, who had bought his bambino. They had an excellent dinner. dinner in a dining room that was protected from the noises of the street. Late in the afternoon, they strolled to the cardinal's old villa, through the Piazza Navona, former site of this long stadium of Domitian, where Michelangelo was fascinated by a half-buried, half-excavated marble torso, brilliantly carved. Standing before the house of one of the Orsini, a relative of Piero's wife Alfonsina, and which Leo thought might be Menelaus carrying Patroclus. They continued on to the Piazza Fiammetta, named after the mistress of Caesar Borgia, son of the Pope, and then to the Riario Palace facing the Via Sistina and the city's cleanest inn, the Hostaria dell'Orso, Inn of the Bear. Baglioni filled in his background on Raphael Riario de San Giorgio, a grandnephew of Pope Sixtus IV, who had been made a cardinal when an 18-year-old student at the University of Pisa. The young cardinal had gone for a visit to the Medici Palace in Florence, and had been worshipping at the altar in the Duomo when assassins killed Giuliano de Medici and stabbed Lorenzo. Though Lorenzo and the Florentines had been convinced that it was Pope Sixtus and his nephews who had connived with the Pazzi to murder both Medici, Lorenzo had absolved the cardinal of knowledge of the plot. Cardinal Riario received Michelangelo amidst piles of boxes and half-packed trunks that were being readied for moving. He read Lorenzo Papalano's letter of introduction, bade Michelangelo welcome to Rome. Your bambino was well sculpted, Buonarroti. Even though it was not an antique, I have the impression that you can carve something quite fine for us. Thank you, Excellency. I should like you to go out this afternoon and see our best marble statues. Start with the Arch of Domitian on the Corso, then go to the Column of Trajan, and after that see the Capitoline collection of bronzes that my granduncle Sixtus IV started. By the time the cardinal finished, he had named some 20 pieces of sculpture in a dozen different collections and parts of the city. Leo Baglioni guided him first to see the river god Marforio, a monstrous-sized statue lying in the street between the Roman Forum and the Forum of Augustus, which was supposed to have been in the Temple of Mars. From here, they moved on to the Column of Trajan, where Michelangelo exclaimed over the carving of the lion devouring the horse. They walked up the winding